Okay, welcome to the Reuters webinar on challenging the idea of disruption in the automotive industry. I'm Roger Lanctot, Director of Automotive Connected Mobility for Strategy Analytics, and I'm joined with three talented speakers here today to address this subject matter. I will ask attendees to avail themselves of the Q&A box to add questions in as we go along. We are going to leave ample time at the end of our session today to respond to those questions, and typically how these events are handled. If we can't get to your question, there will be a follow-up with answers where we can provide them. So without further ado, let the panelists introduce themselves. Let's start with you, Sofia. Who are you and what do you do?
Thank you, Roger. I'm so excited to be here, mostly to get inspired from my panelist colleagues here. So I'm part of the management team at WirelessCar, responsible for strategy, product management, and partnership. WirelessCar is one of the leaders within the digital service creation for automotive business. So within that sector, my intention to be here is to really widen the horizon regarding how to work with data and how to really utilize the value of it. The concept of having the strategy, product management, and partnership is really to creating then yin and yang, setting the strategy and actually according to that, delivering on that with the products, and also balancing with the partnership, make and or buy. So it's a very nice and healthy, I wouldn't say conflict, but yeah, a lot of discussions.
Well, yes, and WirelessCar is connecting millions of cars around the world, actually, I believe, in just about every region of the world, and for a couple of decades now, I think it's fair to say. So Roger Hjelm, Head of Global Connectivity for Polestar, what does that imply? What does that mean?
So, first of all, thank you for having me. Being responsible for connected car within Polestar takes on the challenge to really introduce the connected car. We've been talking about the connected car for ages, at least in my history, the last 20 years, since I've been an employee at WirelessCar as well. And how do you utilize that connectivity? Sometimes I make the comparison to that we are not really bragging about a broadband connection to our apartments or houses today, and we should actually see the car and the infrastructure in the car the same way. So how can we utilize having these capabilities in the best possible way? And what challenges does that really bring with it in terms of privacy, in terms of data monetization, in terms of personalization, and all that that comes around it when the car is actually connected and we don't really have to think about a data plan or whatever it might be. It's more of what can we bring out of that connection to really add value to your ownership or to your life as such. And
Polestar is breaking new ground with being in the forefront of connecting to the Google Cloud and bringing those Google services to the car.
True. We have a partnership as well as Volvo Cars with Google, where we incorporate the Google Automotive services and the Android platform into our infotainment system. And primarily, I would say it's a wonderful partnership. And it also opens up for this thought of, okay, where do we need to be? Where do we need to be proprietary in the things that we're doing, and when can a partner do something much better than us in terms of installation basis, in terms of reach, and all that kind of stuff, and how can we merge these things, all the good things, and make 1 + 1 become 3 in the eyes of the customer and consumer.
Google can be our friend in the automotive
Absolutely.
industry. Yeah, we're seeing the advertisements on TV here in the US all the time now. Very impressive. And also joining us today, we have Prashant Tiwari, who's Director of Intelligent Connected Systems for Toyota. Prashant, exactly what are your activities at Toyota?
Wonderful. First of all, thank you, Roger Lanctot, for moderating this session and Reuters for inviting. And it's my pleasure and excited to be with Sofia from WirelessCar and Roger Hjelm from Polestar. So as Roger Lanctot said, I'm General Manager and Director for the Connected Car R&D for Toyota. In the Silicon Valley, Mountain View office. Particularly, my responsibility is on the R&D side, looking at end-to-end connectivity, so connected car space, both vehicle, edge, and the cloud connectivity. So we are building the edge and the cloud framework for Toyota for next-gen connected services. So mainly from the R&D side, and I lead that group. and excited to be here. And all the things which Roger and Sofia just already mentioned, I very well relate to that, and excited to join the discussion forward.
Excellent. So let's get into our first question here. And I know we all have a lot to say about this. So what are the key sources of vehicle data and data types? A connected car has so many different sensors. You have the engine, you have the in-cabin experience. They're also assessing the external environment. But from your perspective, and I'm going to go first to you, Prashant, as kind of the R&D guy. What are the data sources that you're looking at, and how is that affecting how you look at this challenge?
Absolutely, a wonderful question. And I would say that in the 5 minutes, we already addressed a little bit on that. But let me still kind of list the sources of data we have in the vehicle. And not everybody is aware of that. So first of all, the vehicle sensor, which is obvious. But the thing is, the future vehicles are going to be heavily sensorized. So as we all know, at the same time, the in-cabin personalized experience is becoming big. So those are the sources of data in the vehicle. What people actually undermine is that since all the cars will be connected, and I saw Roger Hjelm mention about Google Cloud and other aspects, there are lots of data which are coming from other sources of that. So 2 examples I'll give. For example, in the future Lexus and Toyota cars, we call it digital ID. So people will kind of join with an ID, and that is connected to their personal profile around the cloud itself. So that will actually give them lots of personalized behavior and other data in the car, which is not just the vehicle sensor. In addition, when you're driving the car on the road, and there are dynamic environment, which are like the weather or other events happening around the world, those are the other sources of data which can come from the edge and the cloud aspect as well. So there's several sources of data on the connected car, and it's going to be really exciting.
So Sofia, what are your thoughts about this, and how is your organization interacting with these different sources of data?
This is so interesting because for the last 20 years, WirelessCar have been managing the data from the cars. What we are sensing a lot is that there are every piece of the car provided by multiple suppliers. They are really eager to connecting whatever piece of ingredients for the car. So everyone are in this quest of sort of producing data based on whatever they are putting into the car, to the physical car. And you know what? There is so much more that actually could be fetched. There are so much data in the car that we are actually still not getting out of the car. So that is one thing. The other thing is that, we can't limit ourselves to the actual car, because nowadays we are talking about the mobility pattern, how the car is actually utilized and used and where is it at. So, and I think that concept, and this is going to be a red thread in our discussion, is about the entire life cycle of the vehicle, the entire life cycle of the user, the entire life cycle of the mobility for the user.
Yeah, you read my mind there, Sofia.
Exactly.
Because you're talking about
vehicle,
you're talking about diagnostic data, how the vehicle systems are performing, and so that does bring into focus what we've been talking about in the industry so much of late, which is it's a product life cycle proposition. We don't just sell cars and forget about them anymore. I assume you have maybe some more thoughts on that subject.
So just adding to that, we want to add sustainable by design, meaning that we can't, because not just the cost, but also the amount of data we want to process. We simply cannot produce that much data for no reason. So going back to the purpose, which the colleagues here will absolutely address, what are the purpose and what are the benefits? So this is why I'm just going to push in and say, hey, mobility pattern provided by the data from the car along with the user's data, that's going to, make marvelous stuff. So the entire palette is quite interesting.
And may I add into this?
Well, Roger, I do want you to add to that. And also, if you could give some concrete examples, because it's fine to talk about diagnostics and product life cycle, but how about some specific examples, as well as your own thoughts generally?
So sorry for my French, but sometimes I'm so sick and tired because we always talk about just give me more data and then I will do wonders. And I'm starting to think after 20 years that that is just the completely wrong direction. Well, I mean, we can generate so much data, but if we don't really know what the purpose is for the data, or for the different data points where 1 + 1 once again becomes 3 in the value proposition in the eyes of the customer, then it doesn't really matter how much data we are generating. So I think what we need to do is to kind of lift our eyebrows a little and say, okay, where are we going, both from a sustainability perspective, whatever it might be, what data do we have, and how can we utilize that to create a new value for our users and for our car users or whatever it might be, and how can we transfer that data into something that is really valuable. Many probably knows that we've been talking about giving back time to consumers. And in our daily lives, that is really something that we have lack of, literally. So how can we, with all this data that we use, how can we combine that and really drive those values? And there is where, you know, society comes into play. How do we actually make sure that we can provide services or values, features, or whatever it might be, where you as a consumer takes time back in your life? How can we be supportive?
Well, okay. Now, Roger, I'm going to ask you for some concrete
okay,
examples. Yes.
So,
and if you don't have them, I'm going to go to Sofia for that.
No. So, I mean, once again, if we just take navigation, I mean, one major thing having Google in our cars, for instance, is that they are one of the best navigation providers in the world. It doesn't really matter because they cover people that walks around, navigating themselves, driving, cycling, do commute by buses. So once again, the data that produces and the knowledge around what traveling is all about is gained into the experience of a Polestar user. And
all right, I'm going to press in a different direction. So GM had a diagnostic solution some years ago. They introduced it and then they got rid of it. But it was would let you know if your fuel pump, your battery, or your starter motor were in danger of failing. But I think they discovered what I felt at the time, which was those things don't fail very often. I'm actually more interested in tire wear, quite honestly, especially in the world of EVs, because tires are going to wear out more frequently. The vehicles are heavier and the torque is so high. So are there diagnostic solutions that—
So this is where
Polestar?
you're addressing, Roger, regarding, and my initial point is that, you know, finding the incentives, because there are a lot of valuable stuff, but if you actually don't have any business owner with an incentive on either having a new revenue or actually, you know, decreasing the cost, it's just going to be a pile of good features. So I think this is, you know, what Roger is talking about. You know, if we together can match up a good, decent amount of, you know, this actually makes a value. This actually makes sense for either the user consumer, but also for Prashant's R&D organization. If you could get insight regarding, you know, how to dimension the car based on the utilization of the actual car. We have run research regarding, you know, what number of hours during a day a car is actually shareable.
So I'm going to throw it to Prashant. This may be a fastball for you, Prashant, but I think you can handle it. So clearly, Toyota's been at the focus of this debate about EVs, hybrids versus EVs, and clearly what Sofia is talking about and what Polestar represents is electrification. And yeah, I don't know how to properly use my car necessarily. What's the Toyota thinking about putting that data to work from a sustainability conversation?
By the way, it's not a fastball and very good question, Roger. I would rather say that maybe add, besides sustainability, the big thing which we are doing in Toyota is called carbon neutrality. So people think that electric car are the answer for everything, and that's the only way to go from sustainability from the nature standpoint. Toyota's approach is more of a portfolio approach where we have electric vehicles. We're releasing 4 of them next year in the US, not just 1, but 4. We have hybrid electric vehicles, which are on every line, and we have fuel cell vehicles, and obviously the gasoline vehicle also. The goal is that another thing which I don't want to kind of add a new can of worm, but what happens is that Tesla owners, and I have several of in the Bay Area, my friends, they don't have 1 car, they have 2 cars because they need 1 car for commute and they need 1 Toyota generally for gasoline Toyota for the commute. So they're actually adding 2 cars to the environment, not just 1 car. But Toyota philosophy is that if you have a hybrid car or a plug-in electric vehicle, you just need 1 car or so. It's more sustainable, carbon neutral that way or so. So that's our approach. But now coming back to the data utilization subject, which is the panel discussion today, the thing is that when we are adding these portfolio vehicles, so electrified vehicle, plug-in vehicle, these are all modern sensor vehicle connected to the edge in the cloud. That actually gives us several amount of data, not just the diagnostic data, which you're mentioning here. So predictive maintenance and diagnostic is just one aspect of that, but several other aspects of data which we can really mine and really kind of add lots of value for the consumer. And as Roger Heim mentioned that when we add a lot of value for the consumer, one of the benefit is that if we can give some insight to the consumer and give them time back or else some recommendation back from the data mining, that's actually added value for the consumer. This is how we're looking at it.
So Roger, just let me add to this with Tiwari, for instance, because that is very interesting. What I mean by this really managing data in a good sense is when you don't really have to worry about your Tiwari. You don't get a notification which generates that you need to do more work. What if this data actually schedules you for your tire change at a workshop at a given time that is already managed in your calendar? Then all of a sudden we're using this data to give time back, and all of a sudden that is also worth something because you can really see the value that it brings to you. And all these hassles that we have in our daily life, and especially in the ownership of a car, the more we use data to remove those hassles, I think the more people will really see the value of data that is driven by the car itself.
Now we are at the early days of exploring this data valuation proposition. Since you're obviously making and selling cars and gathering this data at Polestar and Toyota, of course, I'm curious. It's my belief that in the early days, the broadest perception or the strongest perception of data value is actually at the car makers and the dealers themselves. So I'm assuming that you already understand how valuable this data is and how transformative it is to Polestar in terms of understanding how your product is being used, right?
True.
So you're putting, you put the data to work every day, I'm assuming.
Absolutely, but nowadays compared to how it was in the older days, now we really need to make sure that the consumer is aware. If we want to collect information from the vehicle, that the owner of the vehicle is really aware of and accepts and give their consent for us to collect that data. Then we can always do this in test fleets and whatever, where we actually hold the whole umbrella, but we are not in the situation where we were 10 years ago, where every car every day send a lot of vehicles or data from the vehicles in order for us to make it better.
So let me press you on that a little bit, because we did some user experience evaluations at Strategy Analytics, and there is a bit of a process involved when I take delivery of my Polestar to get credentialed on the platform and to agree, for data and, my account creation. So I'm all synced up. So all these wonderful things are happening. Can you talk a little bit about what went into that process? Because it speaks to educating the customer about this experience.
So when you purchase a Polestar today in this new environment, we have a setup wizard in the car, which step by step taking you through, similar to a cell phone, where you get very well informed about, do you want to do this? Do you want to accept terms and conditions from Google, for instance? Do you want to accept terms and conditions that Polestar has an ID, that we collect information, that we bring to you, explanations on what and why and what purpose why we collect and make a service out of it. And then you pass this through, and then you give your consent in each and every step. And you are, as a consumer, either you accept it or you don't accept it. And that has been a big change and shift in how we looked upon things before compared to now, because I mean, we care about that the user feels secure, feels safe, but and even more in this sense understands why and the purpose of certain things that is related to you and your personal data. And I think that transparency is the only way for us, to your point, Sofia, to go from where we always think about being protected, blah, 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 and turn this into something that is rather or a little more positive, because we are in this world where it's just frightens, oh, my personal data. And I can really, as an individual, understand, and as a professional, really understand. And I value that everybody really thinks about and focus on these things. But and that doesn't remove going from a negative part, talking about it, into positive and what that can actually bring for you.
Well, you're doing God's work, Roger, educating the consumer about this process, because I just took delivery of a 2022 BMW, and I'm sure somewhere in the paperwork I opted into something, but God knows where that happened. I have no idea. And I do know that their terms and conditions say that they can share my data with marketing partners and law enforcement, actually.
But you know what? We are all above 40, meaning that we are actually still in this skepticism with the digital life and, sharing our data and so on. And I would say that, this is a matter of generation, or at least, how digital nomad you are. Because in sense of, as long as you're providing me value, and I'm a lazy person, if you do some of the work for me, I'm writing under whatever. So I think this is a matter of that. So the terms and conditions actually should come up after a while I've been using the service, because you get to enlighten me and you get to entertain me and you get to do my job. So this is also sort of a mind shift in this business, because, WirelessCar have tried with all the snow outside, we've tried to make the climatization, heating up the car intelligent and smart for the last at least 12 years. And it's no limitation of creativity, with the connection to my behavior or calendar or whatever. But because of the privacy, we've sort of been, a bit locked in a corner. However, you've got everything else that is connected. So that is the least hidden information right now in privacy life. So I think our ecosystem is locked in a corner in some cases where the digital life is actually not limited. So this is something that we need to talk about.
So so the key word was transparency. Now, let's move into the second phase of our conversation here and talk about monetization. And I think there are so many misconceptions and so much confusion about monetization. So how can or should vehicle data be quote unquote monetized, taking into account transparency to the customer, privacy, opt-in, etc. So keeping all that in mind, Prashant, how should we approach this idea of monetizing vehicle data?
This is a very, very rich subject, Roger, and thank you for bringing it up. And also, as you mentioned, that monetization has several facets and sometimes misconceptions also. So one thing I just want to put it very clearly to the consumers, especially Toyota consumers and Lexus consumers, is that monetization doesn't mean selling your data, because Toyota takes the privacy really, really very seriously. However, monetization also means that are we adding value from learning the insights? Personalization is a big example for the consumer. So is maybe another word to say instead of monetization is that there is a value we are extracting from the data, and how are we using the data? Either we are using it for insurance or for personalization. Now, as all of us know that OEMs has been approached from several facets for data. especially the insurance companies are the most notorious ones, and people think that OEMs are selling the data, but then we are not. And then in the end, what happens is that the insurance companies start putting OBD dongles to the car because OEMs stop selling the data to them, or they never sold the data to them because privacy of the consumers is so important. Similarly, monetization of the data can be, so what I want to kind of twist this.
There are some companies that appear to be wholesale selling vehicle data. Two that come to mind are GM and Volkswagen, just as an example. But please proceed.
So by the way, so you mentioned something that you took a delivery of 2022 BMW and Polestar experience as well. So there are monetization of the data at the time of the delivery and all those. So where like I have two Lexus which I drive, and after I got my Lexus delivery, I got consumer insight survey that, okay, am I happy with that delivery, or is there a feature I really want in the future Lexus vehicle? And I happily provided that data as a feedback. And several of those consumers, they provide that data. That data is actually a third-party data. And those third party collect that data and they often sell back to the OEM to make the future product better. Similarly, there's a facet of if there are data inside the car, are we selling that to external customers? That is actually very minimal happening right now because of compliance reasons and privacy reasons. So consumers should know that the data which is inside the car is very much like an iPhone, that is the privacy and the data remains inside the car. And we are actually even very limited sending it to edge and the cloud and keeping it as secure as possible.
So now I'm going to go to you, Roger. Now your partner, Google, and we've said nice things about Google, but Google is an organization that's driven on search engine behavior for you and me on our phones and our TVs, and now I guess even in our cars. And that's ultimately about advertising. But I'm quite sure you're aware that the car, in a sense, is like a search engine. Basically, everything you do in the car is like a search. A query to the network about there could be an opportunity to send information that's relevant to that driver at that time, which has some interesting implications if Google decided to take advantage of that. So what is your philosophy as you adopt and implement Google in the car from that standpoint of vehicle data monetization?
So first of all, I cannot speak for Google, but I can speak for the partnership that we have and all the conversations that we have.
That's what we want you to talk about.
Exactly.
Yes, absolutely.
So once again, to your point, yes, Google from a revenue company perspective is very much driven by advertising per se. But we are in the context of a moving thing, around 2 tons. So there is an environment in here which we all respect. It doesn't really matter if you are Google, Polestar, WirelessCar, Toyota, whatever it might be. There are certain legislations that we are actually playing on and with. So driver distraction. I mean, over the last 3 years, the discussions that we have when we have implemented this with Google is, how do we safeguard driver distraction? I mean, there is hardly anything that we can engage with in our big screen, for instance, while you're driving. And that is because we really understand the importance of driver distraction. So to your point now then, okay, do we see the car environment being the platform for future advertising? McDonald's just throwing in, $1
Yeah, sounds
burger.
like a great idea, right?
It could be if you are an advertiser, but if you are someone that provides a product, regardless whether that is with partnerships and all that kind of stuff, we need to adhere to the safety and the security of that product in the eyes of the customer. And who knows? I mean, we have advertisement in the plane today, and there are so many environments where there is. But I can for sure say that will never ever happen if it doesn't happen in a safe way, and if it happens with a true purpose, because we cannot allow things in our cars that potentially make a crash. Will never ever happen. without speaking for Google, but I can't see Google want that to happen either. So let's not forget about that the environment in the car is slightly different because it's a moving thing on 2 tons with a lot of other cars around it. And when you get distracted, you crash and people die.
Lighten up, Roger. You've seen Spotify. I mean, there is no reason for us to just talk about the driver. Spotify is actually addressing the passengers.
Yes.
So in terms of monetization, you know, lifting us, as you say.
Yes.
So how could we actually provide some kind of commercial to the people sitting, but just not the driver? So in terms of, you know, understanding, and Prashant, you were talking about the insurance company. Who said we are about to provide personal information? Absolutely no. It's about sort of providing maybe, you know, pattern regarding eco driving or safe driving. Risk management is what insurance companies want. So I think in some senses, we are so frightened about privacy. And I'm not saying that we're going to be evil. I'm not going to say that we're not going to respect the privacy. Absolutely no. But I think we could actually understand what's okay and what's not. Because in terms of driving
let me ask you to
analytics,
address. Let me ask you to address this point, because the flip side is safety. So we can create value from vehicle data by sharing information in a safe way about safely operating the vehicle.
Exactly. So if the commercial regarding the food or coffee actually is provided to the passenger, so the driver don't have to think about the next stop, then it's a safety feature, because people need to, you know, make a stop.
Well,
So
your Mercedes-Benz will offer
behavior.
your Mercedes-Benz will suggest you get a cup of coffee if you've been driving for too long. Yes.
Exactly.
So that's Lexus, yeah.
But then you're in a slightly different context,
Yeah.
because when we're talking about passengers, especially the rear passengers, I mean, once again, we have had infotainment systems in the rear as well, where you have had the opportunity to watch TV. And I think we have a number of commercial TV channels in the world that actually sends commercials. So it's not a new phenomena from that perspective. It's just a matter of, I think, the evolution of the car, to your point, Sofia, is that, yes, we need to divide the things where you as an owner and driver needs to respect, or we need to respect whatever it is, that context. But when we're entering into more autonomous worlds, then we're entering into living room rather than, you know, this, I have to focus. And then we're talking about something totally different. And is there a difference between watching on your iPad when you're sitting in the rear seat compared to something else? No, probably not. So yes, but I mean, I think when you're addressing this, Roger, is more than, okay, will the car itself be used as the platform where people can really push data into the car and do advertisement or whatever it might be? I'm not so sure, but there might be services from a third party that are integrated in the car, which actually could do that in the future for the good of whatever.
Well, one thing I was kind of driving at a little bit was swarm intelligence, you know, this sort of the knowledge of the crowd and sharing data between cars. Now we're going to shift our conversation to the role of personalization, but I think it's important to bear in mind this sort of crowdsourcing of data, which I want to say could contribute to safe and intelligent operation of the vehicle, for traffic information, for navigation, like you were saying, Roger, working out well. So Prashant, lead us into this personalization conversation in the context of this question. So what role does personalization play, and how far can and should it go? You know, do we want, I'm assuming we want to avoid something creepy, but we want something helpful. But what is your thinking at Toyota R&D?
I mean, very rich subject, actually. We can kind of debate this, or we can discuss this throughout the day. But actually, you gave a very beautiful example, which I just want to quickly say, the swarm intelligence aspect of personalization, which actually not many people realize. So one is that you gain insight of how the consumer or the person driving the car, human factor element, and what are their likes and all those things. That's individual personalization. But let's say when you're driving a car and you are around unsafe drivers, and their personalization profile is there, and the car somehow knows that guidance from the cloud or the edge. That's also another form of personalization, which is making roads safer. So that swarm intelligence or collective personalization of different drivers' behavior, and then how does
Sounds like
those
you're getting
agents
close to a little bit of edge computing conversation here.
correct. So edge is actually one of the best way of driving personalization in the car, because the cloud has pretty much all the profile, but edge knows more closer how many cars and which drivers are driving closer to the road. And that's how we can drive. This is the R&D perspective we have in Toyota, is that edge is one of the fastest way to drive personalization. One is in-vehicle personalization and also edge. And then cloud, of course, has the global information or the God's view, you can say. Now, coming back to what are the other forms of personalization, there are plenty actually. So one thing which we have done, we have looked at it very deeply. People are expecting from cars the same kind of personalization as they are now used to from Amazon or Netflix, where they are recommendation. So based on the past behavior, you recommend how people will behave. One quick example let me give is which is something is going to be in the car very soon, is the eco drive perspective, like the car is driving in a more economical manner and more fuel efficient manner is being there for now 10 plus years. However, the one thing which is not there is your personal driving habit or your routine. Like every day you take a particular route and you have a different mood swings and other things. So that can also add fuel efficiency aspect of the car. That's now coming into the car. So the eco drive based on the personal driving habit is also coming into the car. That's inside the car, personalization married to the drivetrain of the car. There are other forms of personalization where, let's say you drive a particular route and you stop at a particular Starbucks or Dunkin' Donuts on a regular manner or so. The car can recommend based on those kind of behavior, other forms of personalization. Those are more like outside the car perspective and no drivetrain marriage needed. So there are multiple different kinds of personalization. Another third form of personalization, which is now getting big, is, and Mercedes-Benz has actually done really well in that, is when you're sitting in the car and you can customize the environment in the car, which is more user experience, the lighting preferences and all those things based on your personal taste and all, and that can change every day. And the car can detect your mood early and it can change. That's another form of personalization. And then the fourth form of personalization is of course, the personalized ADAS, which is driver safety, active driver safety, like how you're doing the braking, how much time headway gap you want between the cars. When you're in a cruise control mode, what is your preferred way versus others' preferred way? There are several forms of personalization for sure. So we can keep talking about this for long.
Wow. Okay, Prashant, that was pretty thorough.
Yeah.
But I have a feeling all kinds of ideas are percolating in Roger's mind, since he's partnered with a supplier, Google, that is all about personalization, almost obsessively so. So how is that manifesting in my Polestar experience? And I think it's worth bearing in mind, since, and I'm mentioning it because it's happening in China, so people may not be aware that this is actually happening, but we can see in the not too distant future that facial scanning is going to be in the car. And then you're talking about a very personalized experience. But how is this unfolding at Polestar?
So I would say that there are two different modes. Either you're logged in, if we just take the Google experience per se, if you are with your Google account logged into the car, you're transferring more or less the whole thing from your phone to your vehicle. So, I mean, a practical example, if you made a search for something, you will actually have that search accessible in the car. And that is personalized because it happened outside. You just bring that into the car due to the fact that you're logged in with the same account. Then this adds up the same functions that we have in the phone today, for instance, where you have your home destination, you have your office destination and so forth. Of course, they pop up in the map if you're logged in. So this is much driven by, to your point, the personalization that Google is doing as well, and trying to transfer that and just making the car another portion of the ecosystem per se. Similar to having Google Home at home, you transfer into the car when you're out walking, you have it in your cell phone. And of course, that is something that we evaluate as well, because we spend a lot of time in our cars. So if you can have a personalization that you're safe and secure with and that you really love, why shouldn't you really have that in your car as well? Then it's a matter of, once again, coming back to, a car is a slightly different environment than your living room or your office or walking at the street. So there is a balance as well, but of course.
So I gave Prashant a fastball. I'm going to give you a softball. I'm assuming you've had some feedback from your customers about this different kind of experience in the car. Is that fair to say?
No, absolutely.
So how about some examples? What are your customers saying?
So I would tend to think that from a personalization perspective, when the customer is starting to understand what that gives you, they are very happy about it. And those that are traditional Google users in the daily life, that this is just a seamless kind of, journey from whatever into the car. But then, we have the other aspect, which you touched upon many times. Oh, it's Google in the car. I don't want to have anything with Google to do. Or it might be in some cases, you mentioned Spotify, for instance. Okay, but I'm an Apple user. I don't want to have anything with Google to do. It's like the Mountain View versus Sunnyvale kind of, debate. But in general, I would say, when you can do personalization in a good way, it's always positive, because it doesn't really transfer you from one stage to another. You as a user, you recognize yourself. You don't really have to relearn. You don't have to redo a number of things. It's just that you're in a different environment, but you do the same things.
Well, and ultimately and importantly, Polestar's in control of that user interface. Google's not just running wild doing crazy things.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
We are.
So Sofia always has important, insightful things to say about these subjects. Sofia, what are you thinking about?
I think I'm just getting old and getting religious. But you know what? I think personalization, and it's so inspiring to listen to colleagues in the industry. I think there are two parts. One part is, keeping pace with the digital lifestyle, the all intuitivity and, what people are used to. The other part is to really sitting back and understanding what kind of behaviors do we want to push. So it's really easy to talking about this laziness, smoothness. We are in world's top modern city, in the city center, having quite a good amount of money. It's really easy to talk about personalization with the car, getting all the preferences. But in terms of personalization, when people actually can make just the right choice when they choose a car, based on not just the climate impact and sustainability, but for what reason do I need this car? I thought it was a wonderful example from Prashant talking about the entire sort of mobility need of a family. So we have so many choices in pushing some kind of behavior based on what kind of personalization that we actually offer, which actually Google don't have. We do have that kind of power. Once we have this opportunity to just, think above the car and think about rather mobility than just this entity. And this is the power of this industry. And this is why I'm really pushing in thinking about data sharing in the entire ecosystem rather than data ownership, because that will absolutely open doors for us to make good and really owning the mobility, not just these vehicles. So rethinking personalization is my takeaway.
So we do have privacy regulations around the world, and obviously in Europe you have GDPR, and we do have a question: how will personal data collection meet the GDPR regulations? So how do you cope with these regulations? Especially, it sort of blows my mind, in the US, different states have different privacy regulations. So how do you work in a regulatory environment? Maybe, okay, no, Sofia, you want to sound off.
Just adding this, I think it's about educating us within the power of data. I think there is amount of data literacy within executive.
Well, I'm just but there's a compliance issue. That's what I'm talking about.
Absolutely. And I think, for the past 4 years at least, the GDPR is really within our DNA. At least at WirelessCar, we are really on top of it.
Okay.
Even with customers in different markets who actually don't have those kind of regulations, because this is our responsibility. I think when you are this tech company, which is applying to all car makers as well, we are on top of making software in that sense. But that with the actual privacy and the securing the trust and taking care of consent, these are really different segmentation of data. So by understanding what data is,
Roger spoke very specifically about the entire opt-in process and credentialing and connectivity between your existing Gmail account or creating a Gmail account to interact with the system. Prashant, what is Toyota's thinking? You're probably more familiar with this nightmare that I'm suggesting of different states with different privacy regulations. How are you coping with this?
Actually, I'm not really the best person to answer that. The thing is, we take privacy very, very seriously. We are looking into how the regulations are changing on privacy, as you know that, and we are watching it carefully. The GDPR one, definitely Sofia and Roger Hjelm, best person to address, and they address really well. In terms of how the US regulations are shaping up, I would say we are actually watching how the regulations will pan out, and it's too early to answer that at the moment. So far, our approach from Toyota is that we are very high on privacy, and that's why we kind of didn't end. We're not selling any of the data. That's our perspective. If you don't mind, Roger, there's a second question.
Yes.
If you want to go.
You want to jump in? So question 2 is the task of harvesting and making sense of data more related to the business opportunity for car OEMs to offer new mobility services? So I imagine, getting more vehicle data, car makers would get a better understanding of how the vehicles are actually being used. But what are your thoughts in this regard?
No, beautiful question. Quick answer is a big yes. That yes, we are kind of getting new mobility services, and that's exactly. Actually, I'm in the business of R&D, and also the Toyota is making a big push. As several people know that Toyota claim that mobility for all is our motto, and mobility and happiness for all. And Toyota is shifting from not just vehicle maker to more mobility services company or so. Primarily because of that, not just making the cars better in the future from how customers drive the data, but more important is that there are several peripheral adjacent use cases from mobility and learning people's behavior. That's actually is becoming huge right now. And that's something Roger Hjelm, as well as I picked up, Sofia also beautifully addressed that. So car is not just becoming an hardware and just four-wheel kind of a thing. It's becoming really an ecosystem as it's going up. And the quick answer is a big yes, that several new mobility services will be enabled in the future and not too distant future.
So let me ask Roger about that. As we interact with consumers in the industry, we've created apps, we have portals, and we have an interaction in the car. I have to say with my BMW, they didn't tell me, but I noticed a little flashing icon and came to understand that there were software updates, but I had to accept them. And so there is an educational process that has to take place here. But what Prashant is getting at, I think, and so I'm interested in your thoughts, Roger, is we're moving, because as an industry, we are a B2B industry. We sell cars to dealers and through dealers. But increasingly, we have to think about being
selling online, Roger.
I know. Stay with me here. Stay with me. We are steadily moving towards a B2C experience, interacting directly with our consumers. So I wanted to toss that one up to you. How has this affected, philosophically, how you approach the relationship with the customer? A direct engagement and interaction, as opposed to in the past, you sell the car and see you later.
I would say it has been a very positive journey for all of us that sometimes have been at headquarters, having the same model as you're referring to, where you have a dealership that is really owning the ownership of the consumer and have all those discussions. Now, all of a sudden, it ends up where me and Sofia sitting here right now. And I think for good and bad, but getting that close to the consumers and really understand, we're car drivers, all of us, but there's a slightly different context when you hear a customer stating something positive or negative, because it becomes true there and there. And you really need to face it. You cannot hide behind anything. And you either take the approach of seeing that, oh my God, or you really see that as an opportunity, because all of a sudden you get the feedback and you can start those loops and say, how can we make this better? We didn't think about it, but now we get this feedback. So how do we start this innovative loop to really do what the consumers want to? And of course, coming back to data. Once again, data comes into mind. One of my biggest dreams, me and Sofia was talking about this when we had lunch the week after, and we're talking about intermodalities and transport modes and so forth. We have congestion problems in cities, for instance. What happens if we take the car, the parking lot, the scooter, and combine all these three, and all of a sudden we save time because we parked like, a kilometer away from the address that was our end destination, but we took the scooter, and everything is just synced. So when you park with this open parking space, you don't have to find it. A scooter stands there waiting for you, and you arrive at your destination 5 minutes prior to, rather than.
Are you pre-announcing Polestar scooters? No.
There is an electric. Don't tell anyone.
Okay. All right. So the third question is where is the greatest investment or the most challenging solution or proposition that you're working on today? What is the big mountain you're trying to climb today? Prashant, any quick thought on that?
So my quick thought is that several areas which are really happening. So vehicle tech is actually the exciting time to be in. So any of the tech people, they want to come and join the vehicle tech or any of the OEM. That's my plug. But on a serious note, there's no one quick answer. The vehicle architecture itself is changing. There's several kind of technology investment OEMs are making about making the central compute and making the compute really beefier. Similarly, lots of investment on edge and the cloud as well. And then overall, as an ecosystem of mobility services is also big investment happening. So there's so much happening in the vehicle tech. I would say there's no one particular field, and all of them are important. Yeah.
So I'm going to spin question 4 to Sofia and Roger from the standpoint of the role of V2X. So when we start talking about V2X, C-V2X in particular, now we're talking about infrastructure sources of data, perhaps. And again, Prashant's mentioning edge computing, and certain carriers are putting some edge capability on the edge of their networks, specifically for cars. But how does C-V2X change this data monetization conversation? Sofia, do you have some thoughts, or Roger?
I think we've done a bit of a research in understanding, what is the problem of B2B when we talk about the mobility as such, not just the dealers, but the rentals, mobility providers, and so on. Because at this time, you really need to understand your customer. There is no way to hide out. And in that term, we really need to understand that mobility as such need a massive digitalization in order to make that kind of profit. Because otherwise, in reality, it's not going to work if people have a lot of keys, and you want to have a number of people, mechanics, and so on. We need to make it efficient. So in that sense, regarding the V2X, we have this area called journey intelligence. Talk about the climate in the city, which geofence you're going to choose. There are so much data we actually can provide to multiple stakeholders in order to make this entire ecosystem. And I'm really sure that everyone can get a benefit without even competing, without even jeopardizing your business. So I really believe that once we sit together and understand the reality of what mobility it is, because it's not a matter of Toyota or Polestar or any other brand actually being mobility provider as such, and I'm really lonely. It's a matter of getting mobility as such working in an ecosystem.
So you're speaking to collaboration and crowdsourcing and sharing of data. And, we've been talking about educating consumers and making sure they understand, the value of that.
V2X is all about it. The city of Barcelona is providing 523 data sets. Of those, position is provided by more than 52 different formats. So if we want to get ecosystem and V2X in function, making all of these great ideas to come into reality, we need to clean this up. We need to sort of having this conclusion regarding some kind of standards and get to, work with it.
So you're speaking to the other question, which is where is the biggest mountain to climb, which is creating more compatibility and interoperability from different data sources. Roger, any quick thought on the role of C-V2X in this conversation?
I think there are so many. You can everything from safety to once again, whatever we might be. But to your point, Sofia, I think this with standardization, where you have all those players. I mean, once again, governments, car makers, whatever it might be. How can we standardize around a format on a number of data points? I mean, once again, I'm there. We don't need millions to do wonders. We need the right ones in the right format with the right purpose. And when we're talking about vehicle to X, infrastructure to vehicle, whatever it might be, the benefits, I mean, just take on the road. And when we talk about autonomous, back, I think it's 10 years ago, we made a research program down at Lindholmen here in Gothenburg, where we only looked at stoplights. And the mixture of buses, cars, trucks, and whatever it might be, and the frustration that we all see when you go from red to green and you cannot drive. Because as a human being, you just want to press the gas pedal and move on, but it takes you 30 seconds before the car moves. So how can you, with interacting with the cars, car to car, car to infrastructure, how can you really make that more efficient? Because we might not need to run into the red light. We might actually reduce the speed a little, like 500 meters before, because we know when you enter there will be a stoplight. So why drive into the stoplight, back off a little, and then all of a sudden you don't have a queue, because you just go through the stoplight rather than standing still and then have a queue and then move on. And here, in order to achieve that, this collaboration needs to be there, and everybody needs to see the same thing. And I think that is really a mountain to climb, because now we are authorities and everybody needs to see this and see the value in what it brings in the same way for the snowball to really start rolling. And then we getting into this, okay, will governments and will municipalities, traffic authorities, will they have the power to invest? I mean, we're getting into this situation again. Now we passed the line where we're injecting more BEVs into the society than with combustion engine cars and so forth, ICE vehicles. I think that is also something that has to be a trigger for the surroundings of a car, for them to understand and for us to really be able to get into the dialogue, get around the table and see how can we use data from all parties to make this much better, and you find those use cases where all the verticals find a value in it, because I think that is also a thing that we need to figure out. We cannot only be one vertical if we want to do the big innovation and the big change. We need to find value in multiple verticals, because then it's really where we pass the mountain and not only, trying to climb it all the time.
Well, Roger, you just gave the concluding thoughts for our panel discussion today. And I have a vision in my mind of the next time I go to Sweden and I rent a car and I'm driving into Gothenburg, I'm going to get a little message in my Volvo that says, accept cookies for Gothenburg. And so I can have the safest, most contextually aware experience as I'm driving around the city. So thank you to our industry experts today. Thank you for sharing your perspectives, and thank you to audience members for joining, and thank you to Reuters for putting this event together. And see you on the next Reuters event. Thank you very much.
Thank you for
Same
listening.
big thank you to everyone.
Bye-bye.
Yeah. Bye.